Welcome to VBA QnA, where you file in your suggestions and I try and build them, and at the same time teach you how to make them. Our first suggestion is how to make a clock that refreshes, and this is probably the easiest on the list that we have so far. So let's break down the problem. So let's say the situation is you've created something like this. You have a Windows Vista kind of layout, and you have a clock there in the corner that you'd like to rotate according to the hour. And then you have the little clock at the bottom here, and that tells you the time. However, here's the catch. You want this to update constantly. Which leads us to our first clue. If you want something to happen constantly, you're going to have to repeat it. And to repeat something in programming, you use something called a loop. A loop goes round and round and round and round until a certain condition is met. That could be counting from 1 to 10 or going infinitely. In our case, that is while the slideshow is running, and we're lucky because VBA has something for that. As usual, before we get started, right click on the ribbon if you don't have the developer tab and check this box. And then finally go to Visual Basic to open up the project window. Then go to Insert, Module, and we can get started. We're going to create a subroutine called, I'm going to call it Update Time, and we're going to loop round. And that's a simple while active presentation.slideshow window.view.current show position is not 0. And we're going to use the when keyword to end this loop. Now, this loop will crash. Unfortunately, in VBA, if you go too fast, then it doesn't like it. So you need to add do events. That will loop until we exit the slideshow, but that's not all helpful if we're not actually updating the time. So how are we going to update the time? Well, it's quite simple actually. You see, each shape in PowerPoint is given a different name. So if you go to Home, select Selection pane like this, you can see all the names that they're given. But you can also change its name. So I'm going to change this to Time. So when you access this shape, you will use the name time to specify which shape you want to change the properties of. In this case, we want to change the text that's inside it. So VBA has a simple object for that. We're going to make sure this slide has a name, so it goes to Developer tab and insert a random control somewhere and double click on it. And you'll see if you hold down your mouse here, it highlights slide 1. So this slide is called slide 1. We can delete our control after that. Go back to the code editor and go slide1.shapes, and if you put in quotations the name of your shape, for example test, it now knows that you're trying to access test's properties. So then .textFrame.textRange.text will be how we're going to change the text. Now, of course, our shape name isn't test, it's time, so we're going to call it time. And we need to set it to the current time. However, in VBA, it's really this simple, equals time. If you set something to time, it will give you back the time. It's that simple. So that's half of the problem done. Finally, we need to activate the macro somehow. So we can't just set it to do this automatically. It needs to be triggered by something. So let's say that when we hover over this shape, it starts a macro. So if you go to Insert, Action, Mouse over, and Run Macro, we can run this macro when you mouse over this item. And let's test it out. Shift F5 to start the presentation, and it updates every single second. That's half of the problem. But what about the clock face, I hear you ask, and this is where a little bit of maths comes in. VBA doesn't just have one thing for time, it also has hour, minute, and second, which you can use as numbers to influence the rotation of these arms. Let me explain. So you know when you're drawing a pie chart, you have to convert a percentage into the amount of degrees that you're going to draw on the pie? Well, the same kind of thing happens here. The reason you multiply by 3.6 is because there are 360 degrees in a circle divided by 100% in the whole. However, instead of 100% in a whole, we're working with 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. So that means for every minute, our little minute hand goes around the clock 6 degrees. We can do another calculation for hours. Because there are 12 hours in the clock face, then it's 360 divided by 12, which is 30 degrees for every hour. With me so far? Well, it gets a little bit trickier. How about where the hour hand rotates in between hours? You can pause the video at this point if you want a little bit of a challenge. But essentially it goes like this. Each hour is 30 degrees, so there are 30 degrees to play with. We want a value between 0 and 30 that we can add on to the hour. So instead of the top number being 360 degrees in a circle, it's now 30 degrees in an hour, divided by the amount of minutes in an hour, which is 60, and that gives us 0.5 as a degrees multiplier. With the maths all out of the way, we now need to work on the actual design of the clock face. So if we rotate this object, it rotates around its center, which is not really how clock faces work. So we're going to create another duplicate clock face, but make it invisible on the other side to kind of almost change the center of mass, if you will. So we're going to set this to no fill, highlight this as well by pressing Shift, and Control G to group. And now this is its own independent minute hand. Do the same thing with the hour hand by moving it to the opposite place, grouping them together, make one invisible, and although this isn't super accurate, it will do for the time being. Send that behind the knob at the front, and that becomes the hour hand. And now we can name our shapes, hour hand, and we can name this min hand. Back to the VBA editor, and we're going to create another reference to an object. This one is going to change the rotation of our hour hand, and it's going to use the formula of the hour multiplied by 30. Now, of course, there's a slight problem. The hour represents a 24-hour format, but we can do this easily by returning the remainder if you divide by 12. We're just going to use something called the modulus operator. So that's going to be hour mod 12, and that will give us 0 to 12 even if it's in the 24 range. And then we're going to multiply that by 30 degrees. That's 20, sorry. And then we're going to add that to our final bit, which is 0.5 times minute. And then, of course, in the minute and hour brackets, we need to put time like this. And now, that is our first rotation. The same thing we do for minutes, so we're going to copy this across, and we're going to go minute hand dot rotation. It's a much simple formula. It's literally minute time multiplied by 6, because for every minute it is 6 degrees, and that's that. Now, I made one mistake. I forgot to call this min hand instead of minute hand, and of course the rotation of the hour hand started at an angle, so I just duplicate the min hand, make the whole thing shorter, and change that to the hour hand here. Let's see this in action. So I've overlaid a clock face just to check that we've done this properly, and let's mouse over this. And there we have it, absolute perfection. This is how you make a clock face in VBA. For those of you concerned that I'm recording at 1 AM, it's not because it took me that long to work out how to do it, it's because it took me that long to edit everything together at the same time as doing it. As a first episode, I'm going to have to leave this here. But hopefully that was a very good insight into the thought processes that we use when making these PowerPoint creations. If you have any ideas that you want to see me create and explain how to do, then you can join the Discord server, link in the description, and go to VBA QnA suggestions channel, and there's a slow mode of like 5 seconds. Well, was it 15 seconds, but it's not too hard to suggest. If you cannot get into Discord for any reason, you can also email me at projectpowerpointstudios@gmail.com to suggest anything, and I'll see you all next time.